love story that broke the internet. You know that feeling when you're scrolling through your feed late at night, minding your own business, and suddenly you see something that makes you stop mid-scroll and gasp out loud. That's exactly what happened when Maurice posted what millions of people thought was the announcement of the century. Hearts were racing, notifications were exploding, and somewhere in the chaos, reality decided to take a coffee break while everyone else lost their minds. What started as a sweet moment turned into one of the wildest roller coasters the internet has seen in months, and honestly, if you weren't confused at some point during this whole saga, were you even paying attention? It all began so innocently, so beautifully, so perfectly that you'd think someone had scripted it for a romantic comedy. Maurice shared something online that had all the ingredients of a fairy tale moment: affectionate words, genuine emotion, the kind of public display that makes you believe in love again even after your third failed situationship. People saw those words, felt those feelings, and their hearts did that little flip that happens when you think you're witnessing something magical unfold in real time. The comments section transformed into a digital wedding venue faster than you can say congratulations, and suddenly everyone was convinced they'd just watched a man get down on one knee without actually seeing him get down on one knee. The power of suggestion is wild like that. Within hours, social media became an absolute frenzy of emotion and speculation that would make even the most dramatic telenovela look tame. Fans weren't just commenting, they were investigating, analyzing, building entire narratives from breadcrumbs that may or may not have existed. Questions flooded every platform imaginable. Where's the ring? When did this happen? How did he propose? Was it public or private? Did he plan this for months or was it spontaneous? Who knew about it beforehand? The detective work was impressive, honestly, like everyone suddenly became part of some elite FBI unit dedicated to uncovering romantic secrets. People were zooming into photos, studying body language, cross-referencing timelines, and building theories that could rival any conspiracy documentary you've ever binge-watched at 2 in the morning. The great debate that emerged was almost philosophical in its intensity, splitting the internet into camps with passionate arguments on both sides. Does calling someone my love mean you're engaged? Is a public declaration of affection the same as a marriage proposal? Where's the line between expressing feelings and making lifelong commitments? These questions sparked discussions that were equal parts hilarious and fascinating because suddenly everyone had strong opinions about relationships they weren't even part of. Some people were absolutely certain that engagement was happening, pointing to every emoji, every word choice, every gesture as definitive proof. Others were more cautious, suggesting that maybe, just maybe, people were reading a bit too much into things. But caution doesn't trend on Twitter, does it? Meanwhile, there were those wise souls who decided to sit back and watch the chaos unfold with popcorn in hand, which is exactly what our narrator did. Instead of jumping on the assumption train that was rapidly derailing, they chose observation over participation, patience over panic. They watched as the story evolved, mutated, and grew legs of its own, running wild across every corner of the internet. It was like watching a science experiment in real time. How fast can a simple post turn into an international incident? The answer, as it turns out, is incredibly fast. While everyone else was planning someone else's wedding, a few people were just waiting for the dust to settle and the truth to emerge, knowing that in the age of instant reactions, sometimes the smartest thing you can do is absolutely nothing. That's when the blogs and gossip pages smelled blood in the water and went into full feeding frenzy mode. Headlines started popping up everywhere, each more certain than the last, each claiming to have insider information that nobody actually had. Engagement confirmed. Wedding bells for Maurice. Exclusive details on secret proposal. The articles were being written faster than anyone could fact-check them, and fact-checking had apparently left the building entirely anyway. These weren't just reporting on a rumor, they were constructing an entire alternate reality where the engagement was not only real but already had a venue, a date, and probably a color scheme. The gossip machine had turned a moment of affection into a full-blown wedding production, complete with drama, intrigue, and absolutely zero confirmation from anyone who actually mattered. The emotional investment from fans reached levels that were touching, concerning, and utterly fascinating all at once. People were genuinely happy, planning imaginary guest lists, discussing what they'd wear if they were somehow invited to this non-existent wedding, already shipping the couple harder than Amazon ships packages during the holiday season. But mixed in with the excitement was confusion from those trying to figure out what actually happened versus what everyone said happened. Then there were the heartbroken ones, those who'd built up dreams and expectations only to sense that maybe things weren't quite adding up. The whole situation became this bizarre emotional cocktail where joy, confusion, and disappointment were all fighting for dominance, and social media amplified every single feeling to the absolute maximum. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for, though probably not in the way they'd hoped. Maurice himself stepped into the chaos with a public post that was essentially the equivalent of walking into a room full of people planning your wedding and calmly announcing that actually, you're not even dating. He addressed the situation head-on with a clarity that should have existed from the beginning but got lost somewhere between the initial post and the 1,000 blog articles that followed. His message was simple, direct, and probably typed with the kind of exhausted energy that comes from watching your entire life get fictionalized in real time. He wasn't angry, he wasn't cruel, he was just setting the record straight in a way that desperately needed to happen. The clarification was comprehensive and left absolutely no room for continued confusion, though some people would try their best anyway. No engagement happened, no ring was purchased, no proposal took place, no kiss sealed any deal, no marriage promises were exchanged. Basically, none of the things everyone had been celebrating and discussing and planning around had actually occurred in reality. It was like finding out that movie you thought you watched was actually just a really vivid dream, except thousands of people had the same dream simultaneously and convinced each other it was real. Maurice made it clear that showing affection, expressing feelings, being kind and loving towards someone does not automatically translate into marriage intentions, which apparently needed to be said out loud because somewhere along the way, that very basic distinction got completely obliterated. His plea to the public was reasonable and honestly kind of heartbreaking in its simplicity. Please stop creating and spreading narratives that don't exist. Stop building stories from assumptions. Stop turning moments into commitments. Stop putting words in his mouth and rings on fingers that were never there. He drew a clear boundary about responsibility, making it known that he couldn't control what conclusions people jumped to, what stories they told themselves, what realities they constructed from fragments of social media posts. He'd done nothing wrong, said nothing misleading, made no promises he didn't intend to keep, and yet here he was, having to do damage control for a situation he didn't create. The irony wasn't lost on anyone paying attention. The disappointment that followed wasn't really about Maurice doing anything wrong because he genuinely hadn't. It was about the crash that inevitably comes after building expectations too high, too fast, on foundations too shaky. People had already emotionally invested in a narrative, already celebrated a milestone, already imagined a future that never existed outside of collective imagination. When reality came knocking with its inconvenient facts, it felt like something was being taken away even though nothing was actually there to begin with. It's that weird grief you feel when a story you believed in turns out to be fiction, when the movie in your head doesn't match the script of real life. Nobody was really at fault, but everyone was feeling something, and the internet became this strange group therapy session where thousands processed disappointment over events that never happened. What this whole spectacular mess revealed was a masterclass in how social media operates as both connector and distorter of reality. There was no malice involved, no intentional deception, No attempt to mislead or hurt anyone, just a genuine moment that got picked up, twisted, exaggerated, and transformed into something unrecognizable by the machinery of virality. Maurice Sam hadn't disrespected anyone, hadn't insulted anyone, hadn't played games with anyone's emotions. He'd simply existed publicly while affectionate, and the internet did what the internet does best, took something real and made it surreal. Concerns naturally arose about how this might affect relationships, particularly with Sonia, and whether these misunderstandings might create real-world complications in situations that were already probably complicated enough without millions of strangers adding their interpretations. Maurice's final point was actually the most important and probably should have been everyone's approach from the start. When there's actually something serious to announce, when real commitments happen, when genuine milestones occur, there would be an official announcement. Not hints, not breadcrumbs, not moments you have to decode like you're breaking the Da Vinci Code, but clear, unmistakable, intentional communication that leaves no room for confusion. Until then, maybe we all need to take several seats and remember some fundamental truths about life, love, and the internet. Celebrities are actual human beings with actual lives that don't exist for our entertainment or speculation. They're not characters in a show we're watching, not dolls we can play with, not stories we get to write without their consent. Affection between people doesn't come with a mandatory engagement timeline, and showing love doesn't mean signing a marriage contract. Social media takes the tiniest seeds and grows entire forest of assumption, and maybe we need better gardeners. The lessons here are honestly valuable if anyone's willing to learn them instead of just moving on to the next drama. Waiting for actual facts before celebrating, mourning, or forming opinions is apparently a lost art that desperately needs to be rediscovered. Jumping to conclusions might be great exercise, but it's terrible for accuracy and even worse for the people whose lives become the jumping point. After Maurice's clarification, reactions were predictably mixed. Some people appreciated the honesty and moved on, some accepted it with grace, and others lingered in that space of curiosity and what-ifs that's so hard to let go of. But the conversation shifted, at least a little, towards something more reflective and hopefully more respectful. The experience became less about what didn't happen and more about what we can all do better next time. So here we are at the end of this wild ride, hopefully a little wiser and definitely more entertained than when we started. This whole situation gave us drama, confusion, lessons, and honestly a pretty good story about modern love, social media culture, and the gap between perception and reality. If you made it this far, drop a comment about your thoughts. Were you caught up in the engagement excitement? Were you skeptical from the start? Or did you miss this whole thing and you're just catching up now? Hit that like button if you appreciate getting the full story instead of just the headlines, and subscribe because clearly there's never a dull moment when the internet gets involved in other people's lives. Most importantly, let's take this energy of discussion and turn it into something better: patience, understanding, respect for people's actual words instead of our interpretations, and maybe just a tiny bit of chill before we plan the next stranger's entire future. Maurice Sam is out here living his life, and we should probably let him do exactly that. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and maybe verify before you celebrate.